Today, we're going to show you how to install coilovers on your rear-wheel drive Tesla Model 3 or Model Y. Keep in mind the Model Y and Model 3 are going to be the same suspension geometry. Fitment is only specific to your drivetrain, so again, this is for rear-wheel drive configured cars. If you have an all-wheel drive based vehicle, we have a video for you linked below. Starting at the front, pop off your lug nut cover, then your lug nuts, and go ahead and remove the wheel. Remove the nut attaching the top of your sway bar end link and remove it from the strut, and then remove this bolt securing your brake line and move it safely out of the way. Then remove the lower bolt and nut holding the strut to the front lower control arm. Next, using a small pry tool, you can remove the two body clips holding the ABS line to the upper control arm. Remove this bolt and nut in order to loosen and remove the ball joint from the control arm. Next, we're headed under the hood to remove the air vent maintenance cover located between the frunk and the front windshield. Now we're ready to remove the entire frunk assembly. Remove the 4 bolts here on the back side of the frunk, and then under this cover, you'll find 2 more bolts you'll need to remove. Go ahead and remove the bolt holding your windshield washer filler neck. Then, using a pry tool, get these 2 body clips out and remove the cabin air intake duct. At this point, the entire frunk assembly should be free to remove. So now we're going to work on removing the front upper control arm mounts. Start by removing these 2 plastic clips and pull this cover off. You'll have 1 more plastic clip to remove here, so you can lift this last cover and remove this bolt underneath. And then snag these 3 remaining bolts around the strut tower. Head back down to the wheel well and the entire strut, spring, and top mount assembly should be free to remove from the vehicle. Next, with this front suspension assembly on the ground, separate the strut mount bracket by removing the 3 nuts at the top. Remove the OEM spring and strut and replace your new Raceland spring and strut. Then thread the new nuts back on. With the front suspension assembly completed, go ahead and place it back into the vehicle. Using one hand, support the suspension assembly from the bottom and start threading your 4 bolts back in. This can be a challenging step if you're doing the install alone, so we recommend getting a friend to help line up the holes and get these bolts started. Now we can just work in reverse order and start putting everything back together. But make sure you've installed both the front driver and passenger side coilovers before proceeding past this point. Replace the front assembly in the same way that you took it out and go ahead and thread this bolt back into place, securing the windshield washer filler neck. Go ahead and secure the cabin air intake duct back in place with these 4 white plastic clips. Then replace the 6 bolts to secure the front assembly and put the cover back in place over the 2 front bolts. Now snap the air vent maintenance cover back into place, located between the frunk and the front windshield. Head back underneath the car and place the ball joint back in the upper control arm mount. It may be helpful to remove the bolt passing through the front or use a pry tool to open this mount up. Once you get the ball joint secured, pass the bolt back through and thread the nut back on. Replace the lower bolt and nut to secure the coilover to the front lower control arm. Attach the ABS line back to the upper control arm with this plastic push clip. Secure your brake line back in place with the original bolt and push your sway bar end link back through the new mount and thread the nut back on. Finally, go ahead and replace the wheel and let's move on to the rear. Pop off your lug nut cover, then your lug nuts, and go ahead and remove the wheel. Remove the plastic lower control arm cover by taking out the single bolt holding it here. Make sure to support the lower control arm from underneath with a jack or another kind of support and remove the 2 bolts from the lower strut and knuckle. With these removed, you can safely lower the control arm down with your jack and remove the spring. Then there are these 2 bolts securing the top of the strut to the chassis. They can be removed with a deep socket or an extension, and you can go ahead and pull out the rear strut. And we're going to be reusing our OEM hardware, so go ahead and remove it from the old strut, then feed in your new Raceland strut and pop these bolts back in. Your new rear spring will have its own threaded mount, but we'll be reusing the upper and lower spring isolator mounts. So be sure to place the upper isolator on the new threaded mount and the lower isolator on the smaller end of the new spring. Now make sure your spring assembly is oriented with the threaded mount on top, and you can pull your lower control arm down and put it back into place. Then we can just work in reverse order again. Jack your lower control arm back up to compress the spring and strut so you can secure the 2 bolts to the lower strut and the knuckle. Then finally replace your plastic lower control arm cover with the single bolt, pop the wheel back on, and give yourself a pat on the back because you just installed coilovers on your Tesla. As always, if you have any questions, we're happy to help. You can reach us here locally at 801-365-1440 or at info@raceland.com.